20 years ago, a seed was planted and cared for. We painstakingly nurtured it and weathered it against adversity until one day it blossomed and the fruits of our labor began to show. Today, millions have learned, shared, and been inspired by what our community has produced. We proudly served 21 million users from 204 countries in 2019. For our 85,000 technical articles, code samples, and videos, our 450,000 forum questions, and our highly anticipated conferences and events featuring keynote panels, live streams, and industry experts and influencers. We recognize and reward members for their dedication to the community. Through content contributions and mentorships, we ranked number 2,620 in the world with a reach of millions across our social media channels. Thanks to you, our global community of software and data developers grows stronger each day. For more information, visit us at csharpcorner.com.
Good morning and welcome to this another episode of Growth Mindset Show. My name is Mahesh Chan. I hope everybody's doing good. It's been a while. I think after a couple of weeks. If you're joining me first time, welcome to the show. If you're joining us back, welcome back to the show. I'm Mahesh Chan, founder of C Sharp Corner. This showing being live broadcast outside of Philadelphia here. So let's talk about today's topic is how to become a good programmer. When you talk about programmer, it can be a person who's writing code, coder, developer, architect, tech leads, everybody. I'm kind of including everybody because end of the day, we all do at some point most of the work we do, especially unless you are a senior person. So today we have a guest, Joe G. Joe G is, well known. We all know him. So I'm not going to spend too much time because we're trying to keep the show from 30 to 40 minutes. Samrat, welcome to the show. Everybody, welcome to the show. Before I bring my guest today, again, this show is for you. So we want to make sure you get your questions answered. You get some benefit from this. So if you have any questions about how to become a good programmer or developer, just feel free to ask a question. Post in a comment. We will take all your questions, by the end of the show or in between, depending on how it fits in the discussion. So today is going to be chit chat, we're going to share our experiences. And in the end, I'm also going to ask, so Joe is leading a company, leading a team of bunch of developers or multiple teams, I would say, of developers. I'm going to ask him when he's hiring new programmers or developers for his team, what does he look for? What is the skill sets he looks for? So yeah, come on. It's going to be a good, fun show. Joe, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Mahesh. How are you?
Good. How are you? How are things with you? How's you in Arizona?
Yep. I think it's warm. I haven't been outside in like 5 days. I don't really go out much anymore unless I'm traveling. There's really not a need to go outside. I pretty much get everything delivered nowadays.
Yeah, I hear you. We here in Philly today, it's like winter here, right? So kind of, it was snowing last week. We had snow. We still have snow outside. So I'm like you. I'm just inside. I don't even have a car for last 2 years.
Yeah, we consolidated one of our cars too.
Yeah, so I don't have a car.
There's no need to have them.
Now I have a big excuse. Somebody says, "Come here, hang out." Well, I don't even have a car.
Oh, there's always Uber and Lyft too when you need
it. Yeah. Great. So everybody, again, let me repeat again, everybody joining us, Leisure, thank you for joining again. I see you all the time. Thank you so much. We have Joe today. We are going to focus on how to become a good programmer or developer. And let's get to this, Joe. So Joe, I know you, I start programming, I don't know, professionally in 97, 98. So it's been, 25 years. I'm sure you have similar experience. Um, and we have gone through everything. Like we started as intern, started junior developer programmer, work in the teams. Then we manage our own teams, and we hire team members. And now I run a couple of companies. You're running, director at the tech, you're like leading the tech department pretty much. So you want to share a little bit more your experience and journey, and then so people can understand where we're coming from
Wow.
this when we talk about this.
My journey started a long time ago, a little bit earlier than yours, which I guess dates me. I think I started back in officially, I think in the 90s, but unofficially, like in the early 80s, I was doing quote unquote hacking on Commodore 64s and Radio Shacks, TRS 80s, and then, ultimately made my way up. My first job I actually got by kind of sort of not telling the truth. I had a customer of mine in a store I worked at said, "Hey, you seem to know a lot about computers. Do you know anyone who can write me a program to track my real estate apartment?" I'm like, "Sure, I could." I was like, "Cool. When can you start?" I'm like, "I don't know, 2 weeks." So I went back home at the time to my girlfriend and said, "Hey, guess what? I got a new job." It's like, "What are you doing?" It's like, "Oh, I'm going to be writing this computer program for blah, blah, blah." It's like, "You know nothing about computers." I'm like, or computer programming. I'm like, "No, I really don't." So what are you going to do? He's like, "Well, I'm spending the next 2 weeks learning." So I got together a couple of books and started figuring it out. And I think that goes to show a lot of like how I look for developers, not ones that happen to magically start about it, but those that can figure it out. We have an ism at Rocket Mortgage, we'll figure it out. And that's about, not always having the answers. In my opinion, a good engineer or a good software developer doesn't always know the answers, and you're not. A really good software engineer or developer is always looking to solve a problem. Whether that's problem, how do I display these, 15,000 records on a grid, or how do I provide a data entry for, a new order in a system? You're always looking to solve problems.
Right. So this is great. So, looks like you started the solving problem from day one, right? But this
Yep.
is not how every programmer starts, right? Because so people go to college, get a degree, and that get a job, and they assign a project. But when you think of, I want to even go back. When you think of programming, a lot of programmers, especially some programmers who really into deep dive into coding, they don't understand that programming is not really about writing this great, long, awesome, beautiful looking code. It's all about solving a business or whatever problem.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where a lot of developers, especially in the beginning, programmers don't focus understanding the details of the problem, the customers, the end users. You want to spend a little time on that, because to me, that's very important. I keep advocating this to everybody.
Yep. So if we use the example of entering an order system, one of the things I look for when I'm interviewing, or just in general, when someone says, "Hey, I want you to build XYZ," let's just go with the order entering system. Most people will go right away and just automatically start, "Well, I'll take this, take that, put it all together, and that's what you're going to get." Well, that's not what a lot of people are looking for. There's a bunch of questions that you should be asking, trying to discover what the intent is. Because a lot of times you'll get the quote unquote business or your customer or client that'll say, "I need you to build me a mobile app to do this." That's what they're thinking they want. That's not necessarily always what they want. So a lot of times you should, take a step back and really figure out what they want first before you get into, opening up your ID of choice, Visual Studio, right, or what have you, and start typing away code. Understand what the requirements are and question it. There's no such thing as a bad question. Sometimes you're looking at it for, you're looking to figure out the solution or find a problem. I equate sometimes when you go to a doctor, you don't always say, oh, I have a pain in my stomach. I think it's this, this, and this. You go to a doctor and say, here's my symptoms. Doctor's going to look and tell you what's wrong, or hopefully tell you what's wrong, and have a series of things to do. The same thing holds true for when you're building software. Most people are going to come to you with a problem that they're looking for a solution for.
Yep. And even doctor is going to ask you millions of questions too, right?
Yep.
Before, even they may already know, oh, you have fever, let me give you. They're not just going to, oh, you have a fever, let me give you a medicine. Here is a Tylenol.
Yep.
Right. Besides that, they're going to ask you a million other questions because they want to understand the whole background. What did you eat? Did you go outside? Is anybody else sick in the house? So with the same concept, I agree with you. Whenever a programmer, even sitting in the desk, even though you don't interact with some, obviously not all of us interact with the end client, but you need to at least pretend, or at least you got to think like what client may be thinking.
Yep.
And then discuss with your team members who has the requirement. Either it's a project manager or it's the lead or whoever the business owner is. Make sure, even let's take an example, right? So programmer may be working on you just said a grid with displaying some records. As a programmer, good programmer, developer, you have to understand who the user is. How will they be using the page? Are they using on iPad? Are they using iPhone? Are they using on website? Are they going to sit on a computer all the time? Are there millions record they're going to show? So all those things, more time we spend understanding the requirements, better solution we will build. I agree. That's a great point. So everybody, welcome to the show who's joining us now. Make sure you ask questions. We are talking about today how to become a good programmer. And I'm going to ask my questions. If you have any questions, I'll take your questions as well. So Joe, I know we have more questions in the pipeline, but one thing I want to share some of my personal experience. So I was working on this client, and we had to build a simple app, just getting data from a web, and it was 2002. Web services was a new concept there at that time. So the application was I have to bring data from web service and display an Excel sheet and do filtering and all that, apply some formulas and blah, blah. By the way, I was hired as a .NET architect for this job, and I was doing Excel VBA. So there's two questions here, actually. A lot of developers, when you talk to them like, hey, can you work on this? They're like, well, not really. I'm only a .NET programmer. I don't know this. This is their first answer because they just don't want to learn new things. But they don't realize the best thing they can probably do is, regardless of what the other technology is, best thing they can do to themselves and their growth is learn different things. Do you agree? What's your thought on that?
Yeah. I mean, it's, there's an age-old expression, because I have a hammer, everything is a nail, or something like that. And if you only have that one mindset of I'm only a .NET developer, I'm only a Java or a Spring or what have you, your choices become very limited as to what you can do. Not necessarily what you can do as far as career growth and everything, but as far as what you can implement. In your particular case, where you mentioned you came in as a .NET architect and had to do VBA with Excel, I feel for you, because I actually
I hated it.
I wrote an app once back in the 90s that we had all our data. It was in VB and Access/SQL, but we had to write exports that went to Excel because people that were quote unquote in the field had to use Excel, for everything. But even nowadays, I've been doing this for 20, 30 years. I'm just not a .NET developer. I know JavaScript, I know HTML, I know Azure, I know Google Chrome, I know React. I know a bunch of languages because, again, when you're coming to a software developer, you're looking for someone to solve a problem. Yes, you may go to a shops that's all .NET or all Java or all this. But sometimes that tool, and I'm not saying .NET, Java, or any of those can't solve all the problems, but sometimes it's not the best solution for it. For example, let's say, in that order app that we're talking about, you might want to build it for the web, but you also might want a mobile app for it, or you might want something that's more rich and a desktop app. Right now, Java's not the best for that. .NET may not be the best for that. So you might want to look for other solutions to help with that.
Yeah.
It's always good to have that open mindset. And that's one of the things I look for, people that are willing to grow in that area.
So open mindset is very important, right? So means willing to learn and try different things.
Yep.
And that's what really this growth mindset is all about. Really, even research says, doctors says, and the scientists say, whoever, neurosurgeons and all, they have done research that your brain gets sharper when you deal with problems they are challenging, not the one you already know. If you keep doing things like what you already know, your brain doesn't grow, means you don't generate new cells. It's like a body, right? If you're doing exercise, keep doing the same thing, it's just not going to grow.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a good point, very good point here. So let's take one question while we continue to discuss our today we are talking about how to become a good programmer. So Ledger asks, he's a regular visitor. He's here in every show. We love him. He was already in the show too. He's like, in a small company, is it necessary to develop or to write a business requirement specification? So he's pretty much talking about the documentation for requirements, which we also sometimes call it SRS.
Yeah, I mean, every company has their own name for it.
Yeah.
So I think it's one of the reasons for business requirement doc or business spec doc or whatever you call it. The purpose of it is to create something in a near common language for both the business to understand and technology to understand. Who writes it doesn't really matter as much. If you have the ability to write and translate, quote unquote, for lack of a better word, between the business and technology, then there's no reason why you shouldn't. Again, it goes back to that point about being flexible and being able to do more than one thing, especially when you're in smaller companies. I don't know how small your particular company is, but I've worked in companies in size of 10 people in development staffs to 4,000 in my current organization. Sometimes you need to wear the many hats. Sometimes you need to be a quality engineer. Sometimes you need to be a product owner. Sometimes you need to be a business analyst. It just depends. I would not say no to it. The only thing to keep in mind is you just want to make sure you don't force yourself into that one thing. Become really good at it so they always come back to you and not allow you to do other things that you're passionate about.
Yeah, but in last, and I will add a little more to that, is that in the last few years, I would say 3 years or so, the software development has changed a lot. Means in most cases, if it's a new product, the product owners, and they don't even know what they really want. So it's really hard to write that document. And by the time you'll spend time writing document, it may take 3 months. So that's where the agile comes, is you build these stories and start building them and start showing to the customer. So when they change, you go change your story a little bit, add more to it, and they keep showing them. So that's why, agile works sometimes if you don't know exactly what the requirements are. But if the requirements are clear, they will never change that, then it makes sense to go ahead and document that, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's really hard.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. So here's another question: is what are the steps from idea to application according to you? So this is good. This is a good question.
Yeah, and full disclaimer: your mileage may vary. I think it really depends on the type of application, the style. What are your parameters or what are your guidelines for it? In most cases, you have an idea there's usually some sort of validation of that idea, both in conversations, like this. And then there could be an MVP saying here, MVP is most viable product to kind of try it out and see if it works. So, hey, is this kind of what you're looking at? And then you move into full-on development or enhancing it. Other organizations do, a lot more. There could be more steps in there. That BRD that you mentioned, or BRS that you mentioned before. But there's also, wireframing that could come in to kind of prototype the screens that you're using. There's architectural design where you're looking at like, how are you going to do this? So we go back to that order entry. Is it only going to be on the web? Is there going to be a desktop component to it, a mobile component? Then figure out how they all interact with each other. Figure out how the users are going to be using it. What kind of functions do you want for it? Then start building out the application, at that point.
Yep.
Don't forget
So that's good. Yeah, I was writing just my next question in notes. So no, this is again, if it's a business, right? If you're building a business application, most of the time business already comes to you. Hey, this is what I want. I want you to generate these reports for me. So regardless, they don't really care. Then you have to figure it out. Okay, this is how the report's going to look like. You can access it through on the web or mobile, whatever, automatic. They're coming at midnight, or they are dynamically generated. So let's move to our next question. In this, we're talking about how to become a better programmer, software developer, or web developer, whatever you call it. So first tip was you have to be a problem solver. Think like it's a problem and how are you solving that, rather than start writing a code. Second tip was you have to find the best optimal solution. It's not about what technology you use. You may be expert in doing a lot of .NET coding, but there may be a better solution done in non-.NET world, right? For example, if you just have to create a workflow, it may take you 6 months to create in .NET, but there may be a better out there using just online tool by one of those tools. So agree with that. So number 3, your tip was be open-minded. So be open-minded to learn new things and all that. So that's great. So let's go to our next tip. How do you make sure that you're writing good code, like you're following the standards, right? Sometimes, I started programming in C# 1.0, in .NET 1.0. Now it's 10.0, totally different things. So programmers are always keep doing same thing again. A lot of them don't even upgrade yourself. So let's talk on that. How important is to learn the new versions or upgrades of a language or a technology?
I mean, the importance kind of varies depending on it. You always want to keep yourself marketable. And what I mean by that is you always want to have skills that are going to be employable. If I am let's just say COBOL programmer, the number of options I have right now for employment are going to be limited. There's only so many shops that do COBOL programming. If I'm doing Quick Basic or VB6, my choices are limited. So you always want to try to keep yourself marketable and stay. You don't have to be up to date with the latest and greatest, because not everyone is in that. I mean, in my organization, I still maintain some apps on .NET Framework, and I have some apps on .NET Core. You can't always be on the latest and greatest for a variety of reasons. But you should always be educating yourself and always reading up on, trends in the industry to see, like, today I gave myself homework because Google put out that their Flutter SDK, or programming language, depending on how you want to call it, now supports building out Windows applications. So it's something I'm going to look into to see how feasible that is to build both a web app and a desktop app using Flutter. Doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to do it, but I'm going to start looking at it so I know what my options are. To go back to the last one, finding the right tool for the job. you know the options that are out there. It makes it a little bit easier. Probably saying, well, I got so much stuff to do. My job is 9 to 5, and I'm always working there. They don't provide time to learn. How do you learn all this? I'm like, well, if there was a way we can just plug the internet into the back of our head and just assume everything that Google
Feed the
knows,
data.
that'd be great. But we don't. So you have to, just like anything else, if you want to be fit, or if you want to be in good shape, you have to go and exercise. If you want to take care of yourself, you have to put the time aside. So you have to put time aside to learn, whether that's reading blog posts or attending conferences like the C# Corner Conference or the Cloud Summit. Those are ways to learn. You have to put the time aside to learn. Ideally, you can do some of that while you're at work. And at our organization, we dedicate time for team members to go and learn and experiment and figure out new technologies, so that they don't feel obligated or burdened to go and do that, quote unquote, after hours.
Yeah, I think most companies these days allow you to learn, as long as and if you tell them, hey, I'm learning this new new language or whatever, I don't think any company is going to say don't do it.
Yep.
And a lot of them, it's all recorded, or everything is recorded, you can go watch later. It's just matter of putting the time aside. I agree.
Yep.
So that's great. And I think there's a related question here, is that how to choose the best technology for framework to implement, for like easy projects, right? Not complex projects. And I can add my points to that. Um, and especially sometimes you pick a technology sometimes because some companies already have a plan, right? They say we're going to build all these websites in I don't know, in .NET, for example. Why? Because we have developers and they will support and build and all that. So that's just easy decision, right? And as an independent, if you are building your own, it's just matter of what skills you have, right? Technology doesn't matter to me. To me, it can be any language, any front end, as long as you're good at it.
Yep.
What do you think?
Oh, no, I agree. I mean, you could just equate it to, just your spoken language. When I was growing up, in my household, we spoke a lot of Italian because my grandfather and parents knew it. I didn't speak it much because it was easier for me to speak English, and it's the same way for software products. Choosing the best one is not always the case. I mean, sometimes, especially if it's smaller projects, you go with what you know. But when you start talking about larger projects, you look at how many people are going to be on there. If it's just you, maybe it makes sense to use that. But you also have to think about the longevity of the project. Like, it may make sense to pick, let's say, Flutter, because that was the example I gave before. But who's to say that in a year from now, Flutter's not going to be around, or 2 years from now? Then you're out there rewriting it. So you have to also take into account the longevity of the language, how new it is, how many people are going to be around for it, to be able to figure out, if it's the right choice. Like right now, Java's been around forever. .NET has been around for almost 20 years now, 20 years in a couple of days. So those kind of make sense for the longevity. Things like React make sense. JavaScript has been around forever. So it makes sense to do that. But, whether or not you sign up for the latest, greatest JavaScript framework that was created last week, or if you go with something like an Angular, React that have been around forever. There's lots of things to consider. It's not just, a one-stop answer for everything.
Yeah. And that's great. So, and with that, let's add more to this. So, you want to become a good programmer, you already know you're doing it, it doesn't matter, Flutter or .NET or C#. How important it is to read others' code, especially from the team who is building it, and also helping others by answering questions and speaking and writing about it.
So there were quite a few questions in that one.
This is a bunch of questions combined.
And we can just speaking, take I do a lot of blogging and public speaking. Some of it is to learn. I blog so I can learn something, or I blog to help others learn. Maybe I got stuck with a problem and I couldn't figure out solution, and here's a solution for it so that others can't do it. So it helps me learn, but also helps to understand I do it. I think code reviews are also a really good opportunity to learn. And I'm not just talking about code reviews like someone submitted a PR, or someone's about to merge code within a repository, but just going back and looking at it. So let's say you're a .NET developer. There's something to be said about going to the Git repo for the .NET framework and seeing how it's actually being built, and the mechanics behind it, so you understand more of what it is, instead of just calling a, dot first or default for a list, to understand what's doing or what's happening underneath the hood so that you can better optimize your app. Maybe it's not the best solution. Also, doing code reviews with other engineers on your team, whether they're senior or, junior developers entering the field. There's a lot to be learned, because just because you're doing something one way doesn't necessarily mean it's the right way. Doesn't necessarily mean it's the wrong way either. It's the beauty about programming. There's so many different ways to do something. You might learn something from just, reviewing the code from this junior developer that learned something last week on Google. So doing code reviews also helps in that.
So, that's great. So, my next question now is, so I was working a project and I was supposed to be quote unquote .NET architect, right? So I said, this is how we will build. We will build a class library, put all the functionality in this DLL, blah, blah. Then there's this one developer, a young developer, comes to us like, no, this is wrong. We should do this way. And I was like, no, my way is right way. So we always get stuck in this my way is right way. And I look back now, he was right. And we end up building his solution. But how important is for developers to think like everybody who's suggesting, even encourage their teams to suggestions, right? Sometimes you work there, this one guy is always a challenge when you deal with. In another project, I'm just going to relate this, because in another project, there was this senior guy, and it was a simple website, ASP.NET. He just wanted to build a lot of design patterns and a lot of inheritance and interfaces. I'm like, this is just a simple website where you're going to take input. Why do you have to build all these? So there's always that programmer, Bob, he just wants to complicate all these situations or programming.
It's unfortunately a common thing. It goes back to the, hey, this is the way I know it, so I'm going to do it. I was actually working on one of my open source applications last week, and I started going through it. I'm like, am I making this overly complicated just by adding these interfaces or following this pattern that I've always had? Sometimes it's just easier to write 20 lines of code rather than do the abstractions. The part that makes a person a good developer is always doing that questioning, and not always assuming that your way is the right way. If you go back to the example I gave before, when you're doing a code review with a junior engineer, sometimes he or she may know something that you don't know, or may have a new pattern. I used to work with this guy many, many moons ago, and I just started. He was already in his 20, 30 years of software developer. Big time COBOL and C++. I was just getting into it. I knew VB and a little bit of C++. This was before days of .NET. And he had this one problem. He was racking his brains for 3 days. And I said, let me look at it. He's like, well, you don't really know C++, and you don't know COBOL, you don't know our system. I'm like, yeah, I don't. And that's a good thing. You've been staring at a problem because you're looking at it through one lens, where I'm coming in with a fresh set of eyes and new opinions. I might see something a lot quicker. That's where it goes about being open. Eventually, he gave in after another 3 days of suffering and not finding the problem. and I fix it within like an hour, but that's a whole nother story. But being open and being humble is a really important skill. You're not going to know everything. I've been doing software development for 30 years and I lead 50 some odd people, my current job. There are times where they'll tell me something. I'm like, okay, let's take a look. And, I'm not always right, especially if you ask my wife, she'll tell you that all the time.
But she's definitely always right.
Yep.
All right, there's a question. We'll take question from Samrat Krishna. It says, what's your opinion about non-computer science student with learning coding in 6 to 7, 8 months from an institute, and how to get a job? Do companies prefer that?
So in my opinion, how you learned software development or programming doesn't matter. Whether you learned it from books, whether you got a degree, or you went to a boot camp or coaching institute, like you mentioned, Samrat. I look for certain skills. I look for people that are open, people that are willing to change, open to suggestions. You have the right mindset looking for, because the programming languages and skills you can learn. Again, going back to the example before, a young person that just started may see something that a person that's been here for 20 years has. So how you learn is not necessarily as important as the skills you currently have. And what I mean by the skills is your analytical ability, your ability to figure out problems, your ability to work on a team. Because you can be you can be the creator of C#. And if you can't work on the team, I really don't want you on it. I want people that are able to work with others and able to blend as part of the team.
Yeah, and I think I see a lot of the best programmer I find sometimes are the one they never had a degree. They just learn themselves because they just love it and they were passionate about it, and they go beyond, because that's what they even learned in the beginning.
Yep.
All right. Well, that's great, Joe. I'll have a last question, and that is, again, you kind of answered that. You already answered this during, but when you are hiring a new person for your team, what are the key skill sets? First thing, few things you will look for if it's a young developer.
So I pretty much answered that the last one. I'm looking for people that are open, people that are willing to work on a team, people that are open to suggestions, and people that are trying to understand a problem and not just looking to be what I call order takers. Tell me exactly what to do and I'll go and do that. That's probably, in my opinion, one of the worst ways that you can build software. But the key skills are your ability to learn, your coachability, and your ability to work with others.
Well, that's great. That was it. I mean, that covers our today's episode of Growth Mindset. It was fun. Joe, I think they were great points. I think we will have this video recorded. This will benefit even more young developers. Thank you so much for coming in very short notice. I would say in a few days.
No worries.
You are on call for me. Thank you so much for that. And have a nice weekend.
Thank you. You too.